Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about lighting, and there's kind of a lot to break down here, so I'm going to do my best to keep it as simple as I can, but there's just kind of a lot going on. So I would say first off that you don't need to be super overly concerned about light just yet. But it is something you're going to need to know how to do eventually. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how light works and how shadows are cast, etc. So you'll find your lights over here in the modes panel, and you'll see there's 4 different types. So let's start with the simplest one, point light. A point light can cast a shadow. So if I bring out a cube, you can see that it does cast a shadow, like so. And the shadows are in relation to the point light. It's coming from a single point. So the light itself can be set to either movable, which means the light can move around and cast variable shadows. Stationary, which means it stays still, but it can also change color and change brightness. Or static, which means it just stays still. When it's static, it does still cast what we call dynamic shadows, which means the shadows move around. But the light itself is not going to move. You can change the intensity of the light, and you can even go beyond this if you just want to add some more zeros. Not recommended, but you can change the light color, and you can change the radius at which it impacts things. So this doesn't make the light any brighter, it just only changes what objects are going to be touched by the light. If I make the attenuation radius way bigger, it's not really useful, because objects back there don't really need to worry about what's happening with this light. If you make this big, you are going to pay more in the cost of the, when we say cost, we're talking about how long it takes to process it. So if I turn my FPS on, frames per second, you can see that if I were to make attenuation radius really big and add a bunch of movable lights, we're going to see that this number is going to start to drop. It was in the 110s and now it's at 77. And if I were to duplicate all these lights again, you can see all the shadows being cast. Now we're talking 40. So lots of cool lights, but the quality is just going to take a huge hit. So you have to pay attention to your FPS when you're playing with lights in particular. You can also adjust what's called the color temperature. If you wanted to use actual color temperatures, the sun is going to be around 6,500 kelvins, whereas an indoor light is going to be lower. And you can head over to the right, 1200, to get much bluer. So this is really in relation to actual colors. If you want to learn more about that, just Google it, color temperature in kelvins. And that's if you really want to make it look realistic to indoor or outdoor lights. The light is, let's focus on light mass next. So if we look at the particular object, we can see the overall light mass is the quality at which the lighting is going to be calculated, and we can lower this and we can raise it, and that will change the light mass just for this particular cube. We can also tell the cube to cast a shadow or not, and we can say to cast dynamic shadows, which means move around shadows. If we uncheck this, the shadows aren't going to move, they'll just stay as they are. And in order to see the changes that we make, this is just kind of a preview. We do need to make sure we build our lighting. And what that does is it actually renders and bakes the lighting into the objects. And we'll talk more about what baking means later. But you can see that the swarm agent is kicked off, and that's the program that's going to be responsible for rendering the lighting. And there we go. So it does still have some shadow, but it's not going to cast a shadow. So dynamic shadows turned off. If we turn it back on, boom. If we turn off cast shadow, it does still affect the way it's lit, but there you go. So the other type of light is a spotlight, and I made 2 spotlights here, and they're kind of fun. They come down in as a cone in one direction, And if I adjust the angle, there's an inner cone angle and an outer cone angle. Make it really sharp or really broad. If I go super sharp and let's pull up the intensity here. It's pretty weird looking, but basically something like this. And then I can change the outer cone angle a little bit. And it's a pretty cool looking light, as you can see. And you'll notice that it casts a blue light, and this one casts a red, and you'll see the shadows are even impacted by the light color, which is also really cool. So if I hit play, I can even move this object around, and you can see that it'll be impacted by the different colors that it's coming into contact with. So this is all very dynamic, which means it's all moving around. And my frame per second doesn't really take too much of a hit. It seems like it can calculate this no problem. The more faces that your object has, the harder it is as well, the bigger the cost. So another thing when it comes to lighting is, as I said before, it can either be stationary, movable, or static. And let me show you what a movable light would look like if I put one up here. And you can see that actually costs a lot, and the quality of movable lights is not going to be as high. And I even changed the color of this lights as it moved. So still really cool, but it's not going to be as high quality, and it's going to cost much more than a light that's just staying put. Another type of light is a directional light. And a directional light, I already have one over here, is really what lights kind of everything. So you see these shadows coming from over here, and that's all caused by the directional light. If I turn the directional light off, all we get is illumination from our spotlight. Turning it back on, there you go. So the directional light kind of just fills in the whole scene, everything else, and you can see this object way off in the distance. I can change the intensity of my directional light. Make it really dark, make it really bright, you know, somewhere around 1 is kind of default, but you can play with that a little bit. You can adjust the color of your overall ambience. So same thing with color temperature. If you want it to look just like daytime, you can use 6500 kelvins. Of course, then you have to bring the colors back to 0. Anyway, and then you can even add some, like, oops, where was I? You can even add things like bloom if you wanted to, and like light shafts and things like that. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it is pretty cool that what you can do if you want to play around with it. And that's that thing where if you look directly at the light, it kind of creates this effect. Another thing for lights is just how they render. I'm just checking my notes here, making sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, I talked about building lights. I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing is skylight, and honestly, I'm having a hard time figuring it out myself. I needed to watch like a video or tutorial on it, so I'm going to take that one off for now. But go ahead and just play around with lighting, and just keep in mind the cost. If you have too many lights that are let's say static, which means they can move, I mean they can change quality and intensity, you'll start to get these red X's. That's bad. That means it's not going to work. It's going to fail when it tries to build the lighting. You need to change these to static instead of stationary. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks.